so much for joining me today. I am really excited to bring my friend Simona here today. She is with Constantini Productions and she does some pretty cool work. We first met together being on a panel at PodFest in Orlando, Florida. And I could tell that we were like soul sisters just from being on that little panel together. And so I'm just really excited to have her share a little bit about what she does and a little bit about her expertise just in the podcast production space. So Simona, thanks so much for joining me today.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to be on here with you today. And I could not agree with you more. I had the best time being on that panel with you.
It was very clear, I feel like, from that panel that there were like some personalities that jived and some that you were like, we'll probably just be acquaintances.
I'll probably talk to you never again. No, I'm just kidding. But I honestly, when we were on that panel, I was like, this is so great. Like we just bounced, our ideas flowed so well off of each other.
Yeah.
And I just knew, I was like, she knows what she's talking about. She knows what
Well,
she's
we have
doing.
very similar perspectives, I think, to
Yeah,
like, how we approach projects and
yeah,
content and all of that. So
exactly.
I thought it was really cool. Just you don't always meet new friends by being a speaker necessarily. But in our case, just being on that panel together was, I don't know if we would have connected otherwise at the event. So I'm really glad that
I
we were
don't
on
think
the panel
so.
together.
Exactly. Me too. And now we're here.
And now we're here. And we're going to talk a little bit about your expertise and some of the things that you've seen with your clients. So, why don't you give people a little bit of background as to what you do day in and day out?
Yeah, I would love to. So, like you mentioned, my business is called Constantini Productions. It's a full service podcast production agency, and I actually run it out of my home with my team, and my team is virtual, which is great. And we help entrepreneurs in the health, wellness, marketing, and kind of like entertainment spaces launch, grow, and monetize their podcasts. So, everything from helping them create their podcast idea and wrap their head around, what all the components are of their show, all the way to the full execution and the full launch of their show, and then helping them monetize it afterwards and help them grow and secure some amazing guests.
That's wonderful. So, you're kind of like the one-stop shop in
Yeah.
terms of like if somebody wants to really dive into podcasting, they're not sure where to start, they're not sure how to keep it going. Um, is that a correct statement?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I like to tell my clients, like, the only thing you really have to do is hit record and send me the file. We really do take care of everything else. I mean,
Mm,
of course, they have to do approvals and all of that stuff.
sure.
But it really is that one stop shop where, if you're looking for someone to edit, to produce, to help you with content, to do the social media side, um, we've really thought the entire process out
Hmm.
because what I was finding is, people don't really, especially if you're a really busy entrepreneur, people don't want to do their show. They just want to hit record. You know what I mean? So I was like,
Yeah.
how could I create something that allows people to do exactly what they want to do and stay in their own zone of genius, their own expertise, and what they actually enjoy doing every day so they can tap into their own inner flow and they can create from a space that they want to create from instead of having to worry about how do I edit this? Like, should I remove all of the ums? Like, does this edit sound good? Or like, should I
Sure.
upload it? Like, how do I upload it? And we just take the guesswork out of it and it just makes it so much easier for them.
Yeah. What do you feel like has been the biggest barrier for most people to start podcasting or to stay consistent with it? I
So
realize
I
those
would
are two
say,
questions.
no, it's good. No, no, no. It's such a good question. And I have two answers for them because I feel like these two are really like tied at the top for me. And from what I see, the first is that imposter syndrome. Like, what am I going to talk
Mm,
about? How do I get started? What's the first step? Will people even listen to me? All of that is wrapped into that imposter syndrome. And I
yeah.
think that comes from that feeling of like, not enoughness, like those small inklings that we get that tell us like we shouldn't do something or can't do something. The other side, and this is a huge piece, is the tech. People are so confused with the tech. What microphone do I choose? Do I need headphones? Should I
Yeah.
record with headphones? Do I record on Zoom? Should I do something else? How do I get it uploaded to the hosting platform? Right? Like, how do I get it on Spotify? How do I get it on Apple? How do I make an intro?
Yeah.
All of those little details people are so confused with. And so it makes sense though, because if you don't know how to do it, how would you know how to do it? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So yeah, those two are definitely the top two biggest pain points that people have when they're starting out.
Yeah, I mean, I can resonate with a lot of that. I think the imposter syndrome pops up anywhere, whether you're posting about a podcast episode or you're trying to post on Instagram or LinkedIn. Like the imposter syndrome can really take a toll.
Yeah.
And then, yeah, the tech. I mean, I keep things pretty simple on my end, but I know just from attending events like Podfest that you can get pretty technical. And if
Yeah.
you, depending upon your personality, if you're the kind of person that like dives into all those details up front, you can get really overwhelmed and it can prevent you from just even getting started. So,
It absolutely agree. It's so true. And like, when I first started and even now, like, when I do my podcast, it's very simple. Like I do the intro, I use Riverside FM because I like it, but
mhm,
it's simple. It's kind of similar to Zoom. It's like, you're two person side by side. I have my mic, I have my headphones that I like to put in just in case. And that's literally it. Like it's not
yeah,
anything fancy. But then you have people who like to stream and people go live and then so on, so on. And like I'm in the process of starting up a new podcast about podcasting. And that one is so different. Like it's
yeah,
shot on an actual camera and it's very video heavy, which is something more new for me, doing a video
yeah.
podcast versus just a regular audio podcast. Right. So, um, but I also think too, like, especially because like this is what I do, there's something to be said about like learning and growing in your field and in your niche,
Hmm.
right? If it ain't broke, don't fix it. But also, it's great to like learn and to take those opportunities to evolve where you can, right?
Yeah. Yeah. How have you seen yourself evolve over the years in this craft and just in
Oh
this
my goodness.
space?
That is such a good question. Honestly, Valerie, like if I were to go back and like redo my podcast all over again from the beginning, I've thought about it. I'm like, do I re-record? I'm like, no, those first episodes are meant to be the way they are. But even just like the confidence of speaking on a mic has
Mm,
changed drastically. Like when I go back and listen to, I've actually never really gone back and like listened to a lot of the earlier stuff that I did. Um, I'm weird like that. Like I don't like when like if I wrote something and you read it out loud to me, like I don't like when people like read stuff back. Do you know what I
exactly.
mean? I'm like, oh God, I'm like, oh
Yeah.
no. And so I think the biggest piece though is like that confidence piece of being able to like, I remember the first podcast interview I ever did. They had sent me questions in advance and I wrote out all of my answers. I didn't even know like what to answer. I was like, oh my gosh, like what if I make a mistake? Like all this stuff, right? And then, what happens is everything's fine. You know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
you get through the interview, you did a good job, and
Mhm.
it builds that confidence up the whole way. So I would say the biggest change that I've seen in myself has been that confidence to show up, as an authority in what I'm talking about and to be confident in what I'm saying and to like know that it's okay if you make a mistake and if you fumble because A, it can be edited out and B, people like that. You know what I mean? It's like real life, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So do
Those,
you have any tips for people of how to gain more confidence when you're on the microphone?
I love that question. I do. I think that the biggest piece of advice that I would say is just to keep your recording like rolling. It's not going to be perfect, and I think the quicker we can take the idea of perfectionism out of podcasting, the easier it's going to be for you to hit that record button
Mm,
and to get the content out there. And doing things to support yourself in how you want to show up. So by what I mean by that is like if you do better with bullet points, write out bullet points. If you do better ad
mm,
libbing, ad lib. If you do better with just having a couple prep questions for an interview and you want to freestyle and free flow the rest of it, do that,
yeah.
um and also script the whole thing if you need to, you know
I
I
was gonna
think,
say, you haven't
yeah,
said anything about a script. Are you a
yeah,
fan of scripts or not?
I like them. I when I do my solo episodes, it really depends on like the mood that I'm in, but like if I do a
Mhm.
solo episode, I like to have a script in front of me so I know what I'm talking about. It's like I get like a good idea and I'm like, oh, I really want to hit on that point and I want to like make sure that I actually talk about that. So that would be like a good reason, to use a script. One thing that I would say about a script is just making sure that it doesn't sound like you're reading. You
Yeah.
want to really sound like you're talking to people and you're having a conversation with whoever's listening to you on the other end, because you can tell when people are reading off a script, right? You can tell and they're like, and then I did this. period. And
Yeah.
it's like, and then we did this. And it's like, okay, you can hear that when people
Yeah.
are talking. Yeah. So those would be my biggest tips. Is like biggest takeaway from that is, making sure that you are doing things to support your best way of showing up. And however that looks like for you needs to come from you ultimately.
That's great. That's wonderful. So, as far as like promoting your own business and your own podcasts, like, have you found any specific things to work really well for getting the word out?
Mm.
Anything that you have used for marketing your own brands that has really brought you just, you know, a win here and there, whether it was a complex strategy or a simple strategy?
That's a really good question. Um, and I'll be the first to say that I've never been the one to prioritize the promotion of my own business, which is not a good thing. And I think that as a business owner, it's easy to let yourself be last, especially when
So,
you're
so where do people find you if you haven't
so
prioritized marketing?
no, but it's a good point. But so here's the thing. So I know the value of it because I obviously like, we do tons
Right.
of promotional stuff. I'm always trying to create content if and when I can, right?
Right.
So people find me through Instagram, prime like is a good source that they find me through. And what I've realized is they're finding me through past posts. So it may not be something that I'm posting today or something that I posted
Mhm.
yesterday. And it could be something that I posted, 3 weeks ago or a month ago or a year ago. And people find it through your hashtags. One thing that I've noticed and I've heard a lot is that people find me through the podcast producer and podcast manager hashtags. I've had a lot of clients come to me who are like, I was just searching on Instagram and I put in, hashtag podcast manager and you're the first one that came up. And I was like, oh, that's really cool. And it has to be because of the content that I have on there.
Yeah,
Right. So that would be like, that's a huge place. And then, from there, my business now is about 90% referral based, I would
sure.
say, which is great. But before it got to that point, I had to show up, right? Before I got to that point, like I leveraged my Facebook network, which is random. But if you think about all the random friends you have on Facebook, it's like thousands of friends. You never know who's watching, right?
Right.
So yeah, definitely there. LinkedIn and Instagram have all three been really good, like sources of business for me, as well as my newsletter. So I have a couple free guides on my website. I recently just redid my website and made it more SEO friendly. It actually like shows up like this is a side tangent, but my past website um didn't have like the SSL like security on
Oh,
it. So
sure.
anytime
Yep.
it was so bad. So anytime anyone would go onto it, it would show up like all of these like
Warning, warning, warning.
war. Yeah. And I was like, oh my goodness. And so Google was like, absolutely not. You can go to the last
Yeah.
page on the whole, whatever. But now it actually comes up. So people will find me through my freebies on my website, but again, can come from Instagram, right? Like you
Yeah.
can see those clicks, like those clicks come from social media. So, even though you post something on social media now, you may not see the benefit today, you may not see the benefit tomorrow, but it will benefit you. And I think that's like the most important part about showing up. And like, I will tell you, Valerie, like when we're finding guests for my clients' podcast, if you don't have a
Yeah.
social media presence, we're not considering you. And I don't even mean that in like an egotistical way. Like you could be so great at what you're sharing, but if you
Yeah.
don't have a network, what's the value trade, right? Like what's the
Right.
trade for my client to have someone on their show, right?
Yeah.
So it's important. And I know you know the value of that too. So
No, I do. Well, it's encouraging to hear you say that hashtags are still being so helpful because in the short run or the short term, a lot of times hashtags don't feel as effective for people. You
yeah.
know, as far as like number of likes from new people. Um, Usually it's more like stories and reels that are going to
Yeah.
get you noticed by new faces today on Instagram. But I love what you're saying here is just a few strategic hashtags are letting you come up when you know people are searching for those specific kinds of things. And I haven't looked at your profile in huge depth to see like if you're putting 30 hashtags on each post. I'm guessing you're probably just doing a handful. Um,
I would say I do like between like 15
right.
ish to like 20. And I try and change them up depending on what the post is specific to, but I try and have like those constant hashtags too.
Yeah.
Um, because I feel like, and I don't know a whole lot about like how the hashtag like an algorithm works per se, but like I feel like if you have a couple that are constant, like I feel like it's like recognizing you as like this is what, and I do know that if you have hashtags that are not specific to your content, like it just doesn't even,
Yeah.
it's got to be specific to what you're talking about.
Right, it's gotta be relevant.
Yeah.
For sure, I see people using both approaches. I talk to folks
Mm,
about, like, there's some hashtags that you'll put in because people are searching for those keywords,
yeah.
and then you put other hashtags in that you just want to subconsciously tell your audience, "This is what I do." And in a lot of
Yeah.
ways, like, that's part of why hashtags are becoming more relevant on platforms like LinkedIn, but a lot of times I will put hashtags on LinkedIn posts purely for that subconscious quick message of like, hey, if
Mm,
this is the only word that someone looks at on my post today, I want them to know that I do social media. I want them to know I do content marketing. I want them to know I do
exactly.
podcast production in your case. Like put
Exactly.
those phrases in because people are skimming. They're not always reading the full huge post.
Mm-hmm.
But it's encouraging to me that the hashtags are working, and um it's encouraging to me too because the disappearing content in stories is so popular today, but yet for you, you're saying that some of the like permanent content is what
Yeah.
is actually performing well for you. So
Yeah.
sometimes people get so focused on the latest trendy thing that they forget about the old tried and true types of content you can do on platforms, and they still can help your platform and your brand out in a lot of great ways.
Exactly. And I think too, like it's not always about going viral. It's not always about,
Exactly.
having that post that reaches 50,000 views. Like that's great and it's nice when that happens, but then what happens is you have a bunch of people who are following you for like a funny video that you may have done who may not resonate at all with your content. Like I would rather have 20 views on a reel than have 100,000 if that meant those 20 views were people that are actually cared about my content. You know,
Agreed.
it's not about like, I use stories for like market research. If I have a quick question to like engage my audience, because of course everyone goes to stories first. I'll do like behind the scenes of like my day. And like I post a lot about my dog and whatever, those little things, right?
Yeah.
Because those are the things that build that relationship. But then when I have a launch, like when I'm launching something, it goes in my feed. I want that to be there, right? I want people to see that. And then I can share that to my stories. And people are like, oh, that makes a lot of sense because she talks about X, Y, and Z in her stories all the time. Oh, it makes so much sense that she would launch X, Y, and Z about this, or she would have a free guide to help you launch this, those
Yeah.
little things, right? Like they work together, but you can't have just one and not the other. Like you have to have both.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think like I mean, that's kind of the case across social media at large too. Like you just mentioned earlier a few minutes ago, Instagram, but also Facebook and LinkedIn were
Mm,
strategic for you. Like you didn't put all your eggs in just one basket.
mm,
And I think that's an important thing to note as well. Um,
yeah.
so yeah, that's great. As far as like podcasting goes, like do you have any advice for somebody who's thinking of a new podcast idea and not sure, like, how do you get that going? What are the first steps? Where should somebody start?
So I think the first place to start, and this is my favorite place to start with anything that I do with my clients, with my own self, whatever. I like to start with why. And this is like Simon
Mhm.
Sinek's start with why.
Yeah,
Why are you doing this particular thing? Why are people going to care? Why do you want to have this show? And the reason why I say that is because that's what's going to keep you anchored in those moments where you don't feel like doing your editing, when you don't feel like bringing your podcast and making it live. Like your stronger why is what's going to keep you grounded in the bigger purpose of your show. Once you've identified that why, then I would suggest that, you take a look at, what kind of name do you want for your podcast? What niche do you feel like you're going to follow, like that you're going to fall in?
yeah,
What type of podcast do you want? You want to have like an interview style? Or are you doing, solo episodes? Do you have a co-host? Is it a series? Is it bi-weekly? Is it a weekly podcast, right? Like what's the structure of the show?
sure.
Um, and then I would say going into your like mission of the podcast. I love creating mission statements for podcasts because and this is something that I do with my clients when we're getting started, is really clearly defining like, who is this show for? Why are people going to care? What are they hoping to gain from it? And when you have that mission statement, everything drives from there. Your intro
Mhm.
drives from there, your outro drives from there, your show description drives from there. And then um, and your trailer as well, if you want to have a trailer for your show, and then bringing those pieces together, then you can start to record because your message is aligning, right? Then what kind of music do you want to pick? So that's kind of like the process and like
Yeah,
the flow. But I have a download and I can send you the link for it if you wanted to put it in the show notes, and it kind of breaks down like what you should do every
sure.
single week to like hit that launch.
That'd be great.
Yeah, I'll send it your way because I feel like having a little bit of structure and like a little bit of guidance is always nice when you have no idea where you're going to start.
Yeah. Okay. So this is all like a spin-off question, and it's something
Mhm.
that I have wondered. Do you have any tips for like somebody who's trying to maybe find a co-host for a show? How do
Mm.
you go about finding the right person for that?
I
Because I
love
have an
that
idea for
question.
a show, has nothing to do with my business. Well, it's tangential to my business, but um it'd be more of a hobby, passion project kind of a thing, but I think it could be really fun with a co-host, but I
Yeah,
don't know, like, how do I get even started to find the right person?
that's such a good question. So there's one of the things I've seen people do is post in Facebook groups, like asking,
Mhm.
I want to start a show about X, Y, and Z. Is there anyone here who would be interested in co-hosting this podcast for me or with me? Sorry. And
Yeah.
what's great about that is you're tapping into a network of people who are already podcasters, who kind of already get it. They understand the production side of it. Odds are they
Yeah.
have their own podcast, or maybe they did have one and they folded it, like whatever, right? So
Yeah.
then you have someone who's like well versed and like they know what to do and like where to start. Then I would say making sure that you align with that person and you have very clearly defined like roles, who is taking care of what, so that there's no
Mhm.
frustration, because having a co-host is like it's managing a whole new relationship, right?
Yeah.
And you want to make sure that you have clear, like a business would, you have clear roles, you have clear responsibilities, you know who's taking care of what, and you're each like happy with that. Maybe one person is more the creative, maybe one person is more the tech, right?
Yeah.
Um, and so that's one thing that I would really think about. And you have to make sure that you like jive with that person and that the person has the capacity and like will actually show up and
Yeah.
do the recordings, right? And then of course, like I'm sure you already know this for sure, but like I would bank the content in advance in case you can't align those dates to
Mm.
record. So like making sure you have a lot of content kind of stocked so that and you make it a point to have a um like regular standing meeting, like I don't know, once a month or whatever, and you go
Yeah.
and you record content. So I would say like, check Facebook groups for sure, put a call out even on your own social media pages and see, you never know.
Yeah.
And talk a little bit about what the show idea is, give people that insight, make sure your values align, and then make sure you take the time to record the content in advance.
Nice. I like it. That's cool. Yeah.
Awesome.
I don't know if in my mind I'm like, would that even work for
I
what I'm
know.
looking for?
I know.
But I also
I
am
get
the
it.
kind of person that, as a started off as a freelancer, solopreneur. Now I have a couple people I work with, but like group projects are not always in the car. Like a lot of times I'm just working solo. I have my tasks, I'm
Yeah,
covering my bases, or I'm working in a group project, but I'm not leading it.
exactly.
Um, this kind of thing would definitely be a more hands-on group project. So
Exactly.
it's definitely
Exactly.
requires a little bit more forethought.
It really does. And I think it's doable too, especially if you have like the right co-host and you actually like jive really well and like you have a good time
Yeah.
doing it, 100%. But again, just like making sure that you have the time and space in your life to do it too, right?
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. If it's a big enough passion or
totally.
interest, like you'll find a time.
Totally.
Yeah, it's interesting. Like I was telling you, I've had a crazy summer, but in the midst of that, I found some time to start another podcast that is completely unrelated. But I did it like during little pockets of time. Now, granted, it was something that did not require coordinating with a
Right.
co-host, and it's something that will probably be like a 30 episodes and I'm done kind of a thing.
Oh, I love it.
But I went into it knowing that like this is a project for just this season of life. And I was able to make a priority for it. So,
I love that.
but yeah.
Is it live?
Not yet.
Not yet. Okay.
Not yet. So,
I'm excited.
but similar to what you're talking about, like I just banked a ton of the recordings while I had the time, and then I can let it all drip out when I'm ready to.
Exactly.
I think that's the
Exactly.
other thing. I've seen this with like book launches. I've seen this with social media content. I see it with people doing podcasts too. Like you record your stuff and then you're just so anxious to get it out, and sometimes you rush that process
Totally.
and it's unnecessary. You could put a little bit more forethought. The world doesn't know that you have these recordings or this book ready to go. You could really build up some hype around your book or your podcast or
Exactly.
whatever the case may be. And then have plenty of stuff to just let roll out because life happens.
Exactly.
And we've seen that here in the last few years, like sickness can hit you at any point, and having stuff in the bank to
It's so
push
good.
out and not have to record something if you've lost your voice or you feel sick or whatever.
Exactly. And you're like hopping on, you're doing your
Powerful.
intro and you're like, oh my God, I'm so sick right now. People are like, are you okay?
Right. But you committed to doing something every week, and
Exactly.
but if you've got
Exactly.
those batched recordings, you've got a bunch that you can pull from. It really does make a huge difference. So
Totally. And honestly, I love that you said that because I think that's so important. And I think that, that is so true. People are just so eager to get everything out all the time. And it's like, you've put so much love and so much care into this. Just, you have to launch it properly. And like, I'm in the process of launching a new podcast myself, and I was aiming for a beginning of September launch. And I was like, we're going to Europe for 2 weeks. And I'm at the end of August. And I'm like, why am I rushing this? You
yeah,
know what I
what's
mean?
the
Like I
rush?
literally, I'm going to push. So I pushed it back to October. I'm like, nobody knows the difference. I mean, now everyone listening to the podcast knows, but that's okay. I'm like, but it's better for that. It's better
Yeah.
that way.
Yeah. I mean,
Oh
yeah, with
yeah.
books, people push it so much. And they're like, I think they have this thought that as soon as the book's done with editing, that it's ready to go live. And they don't realize that there's so many pieces to the launch process
Yeah.
of that product. And we talked about this on our panel that, I mean, you can spend weeks or months really building up hype for a product that you finished months ago.
Exactly.
Again, the world doesn't need to know that your book is all done or that your podcast has, already has 10 episodes ready to go. But then you can really focus on building a launch team and
Exactly.
um, getting the right promotion out and thinking about what social media content you're doing and building your lists and all these things that when you're ready to actually go live with it,
Yeah.
you can do. So,
Yeah. And it's interesting you say that because I know that one thing that because when we were on our panel together, you talked a lot about this, having that launch team. And I think that's so important. And also having a list. Like I've talked to so many authors,
mhm,
and by doing podcasts, like we're doing their
right,
podcasts and we're getting ready to do their launches, and I'm helping them build their launch plan, because that's one piece that we do is we make sure there's an actual launch plan with all of your marketing channels in mind, right?
right.
And the amount of times that authors will say, I don't have a list. I'm like, but how do you not have a list? You just launched your book. You know what I mean? You
Mhm.
just did a book launch and you just sold however many copies. You should have all those names. Do you know what I mean? Like
Right.
it's so crazy to me. And I'm like, oh my goodness. So like pro tip, build that email list. Even if you don't think it's valuable right now, or you don't think you're ever going to use it, you might. And it's really important to have that available. Even 10 people. It's 10 people then that you would have, you know, had before. So
Well, and that goes back to like how you talked about how you started kind of just building your own business is you
mhm.
started with the people that you knew.
Yeah,
And the reality is like everybody out there has folks in their connections, whether it's Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, Twitter. Like I regularly go through my friend list and I'm like, all right, who would be a good podcast guest for this podcast? Like
mm,
who in my network have I connected with recently that I should ask on the show? You know, and I don't know how much the everybody else scours those or I had a friend recently move to Nashville, Tennessee.
ooh,
And so I went through my friend list and I just, spent 20 minutes scrolling through manually because they don't make that easy,
yeah,
but
they don't make it easy.
scrolling through and like, who of my friends do I know that are in Nashville? And I was able to do a bunch of connections to her, but it reminded me of like, oh yeah, this person does this and that person does that. And oh, I should connect with them for this.
Mhm.
Like there's so many other things that come up just when you remind yourself of like who is in your network.
It's
Um,
true.
and yeah, for a podcast launch, I think that's key because there, depending on what your podcast or content really is about, like there are people in your network who have similar interests.
Mhm.
Um, and the other side of it too is you never know who has an interest and they just haven't expressed it yet, or they've gone through
Exactly.
something and they haven't gone public with it. Um, but you talking about your podcast could be really powerful and beneficial for them. So,
Exactly.
yeah,
Exactly. And like, you never know how people are connected. And like when I was first building my business, I started everything on Fiverr. Like I had a freelancing profile on Fiverr. I had my regular clients on Fiverr,
yeah,
excuse me, that I would edit for every single week. And, at some point I was like, let's shift this. And so I thought about what kind of business do I want to have?
yeah.
How do I want the relationships in that business to be? Right? Like how do I what do I want in my life?
Mhm.
And I really wanted clients, and I'm so grateful all of my clients feel like friends. Do you know what I mean? And of
Mhm.
course, of course, there's boundaries, like, whatever, but they tell me about their kids and I tell them about my life. And, there's no like, they're like, how was the wine night with the girls? You know what I mean? And it's like
Mhm.
stuff like that. That's the kind of business that I always wanted.
Yeah,
I came from a very corporate world where you don't get any of that. And
right.
so when I migrated my clients over, it was, I did it because I wanted to build that relationship with them. And I did it because I wanted to support them and help them grow their show. And it's you can only do so much through a freelancing app.
Yeah,
And it ended up being great. And then, the more they get to know you, the more people get to trust you, right? And
yeah,
they're like, wow, this person actually does a good job, and they actually care about the work that they're doing, and they actually care about my life, right? Like I
yeah.
just think that, I don't know, decent
Well, and
human kindness.
the
Like,
the type of work that you're doing, like you get so into everybody's stories
yeah.
that I think the reality is like I
How
wish I
can
had
you
learned this
not?
earlier on. It's like don't waste your time with people who you don't resonate with.
Exactly.
You know, if they're not your ideal person to work with and you don't enjoy hearing their stories or promoting their story and their brand, like don't waste the
Yes.
time. It's not worth
And
it.
you can even think of that in the sense of like guests that you bring on your show. If you don't
Mhm.
resonate with that guest, you can tell. Like, if you are in tune with yourself, you can tell
Yeah.
if you resonate with someone right off the bat or not. And if you think that their story may not be as impactful as you're hoping for on your podcast, you don't have to bring people on as a guest. You know what I mean? Like
Mhm.
you have to, yeah, it's
You
so
can also
important.
crop sections out of
Yes.
the
Crop
recording.
that down.
I mean, there's been times where like we're recording and somebody starts going like into something political or gets opinionated about
Um,
something. And I'm like, we're just, that's fine. You keep talking, but we're going to just crop that out. You know, you have
exactly. You're
that
like, that's not
liberty
the
if it's your
podcast.
show.
It's not the podcast for that.
Yeah.
There are other podcasts for that if you want to go have
There are
those
other
kinds of
great
conversations.
podcasts for that. Yep.
Exactly.
Uh, well, if you had one piece of advice for anyone who's listening about how to take their podcasting to the next level, whether they're just thinking about it or they've been doing it for a while, what advice would you leave them with?
Oh, that's such a powerful question. Okay. I would say to, okay, this is like a very left field answer, but I would say to prioritize kindness. Okay.
Mm,
And what I mean by this is at the end of the day, we're all human beings. Whether you're
right.
communicating with someone on social media, you're blasting them, through your newsletter, you have a guest on your podcast, you are running ads. At the end of the day, whoever is consuming and watching and being a part of your experience is a human being.
Right.
The way that we build relationships is through kindness and caring, genuine care about other people.
Yeah.
When you can approach things by that mindset of like giving someone value as
Yep.
opposed to getting, the getting will always come. You know
Right.
what I mean? If you're open to the giving. So I would say if you're wanting to like elevate, prioritize your the way that you're showing up. Prioritize your kindness, because that prioritizes your community, and your community is what helps you grow, right? Your community are the people who are sharing your show. Your community are the people who actually care about what you're talking about every single day. So the more kindness you can show them, I think the more you will get back in return.
I love that. That's
Thanks.
such an
Left field.
unexpected,
I know.
but I mean, after being in business now for about 10 years, like it's very true. The more you give out, like it just naturally comes back to you. So I am
Exactly.
in full support of the advice you just heard
Thank
from
you.
Simona here. Before we sign off here, if people want to get more from you or just connect more, where can they find you?
Yes, you can find me on Instagram. It's at Simona with 2 underscores and then Constantini, Costantini. And then my website is simonacostantini.com, and it has all of my links on there too. But I think those would be the best 2 places. And then I also have the free resources on my website as well. And you can check those out too. And if you have any questions, just send me an email. I'll always answer.
Great.
I'm a real person on the other end. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, thanks, Simona, for sharing so much of your story and your wisdom today, and just for being a friend. It's so great
Thank
meeting
you.
somebody brand new from a conference and just feeling like you connect instantly. So I'm grateful for your friendship and grateful that you came on today.
Thank you so much for having me. Honestly, I'm so grateful for you. And yeah, this was amazing. Thank you.
If you liked what you just heard, please hit subscribe to make sure you don't miss any of our future episodes. And while you're at it, go ahead and leave us a review. That not only helps us out, but it helps others discover great interviews just like this one.